All right, welcome back to Bourbon Hunter Anonymous. If you're just joining us, this is part 2 of my interview with my husband, Mock, and if you caught part 1, you already know we didn't even scratch the surface. In this episode, we're picking back up with the stuff bourbon hunters actually want to know. The bottles, the hunting, the regrets, the ones that got away, and the ones that probably shouldn't have been brought home, but we're here anyway. We're getting into his collection, how it's grown, what he actually drinks versus what he just stares at, and how bourbon went from something he liked to a full-blown lifestyle choice. No hype, no flexing, just real talk, real bottles, and probably a few opinions that will get him yelled at online. Let's get back into it. So, what was the first bourbon that made you stop and go, oh, I get it now?
It was that first Knob Creek 9-year.
Okay.
That I don't know if there's. That's a hard question to answer.
But you did.
Yes and no. It seems like the longer that this goes on, the longer that I do this hobby, and the more bottles I try. There's so many good bottles, and after a while, like, good's good. And
So the one I hear you talk about a lot is Rock Hill Farms. So was that the first bottle that you were like, yeah?
yeah, that was the first one that really blew me away. And that was right at the beginning of me starting my own bourbon collection. And at the time I didn't really know much about like allocateds and things like that. I just went into a local store and I didn't even know that they called them allocateds. I was like, hey, do you guys have anything that's like high end, hard to get? You know, do you keep anything behind the counter? And the lady was like, we got this Rock Hill Farms. And I think at the time I paid like $64 for the bottle. So I swiped it and went home and poured a glass of it. And I don't remember a lot of drinks. I remember that one.
Yeah. So early on, would you say you were chasing more flavor or status without realizing it?
Oh, status.
Yeah.
It,
Oh.
both, right? So I was relying on the input of others to help guide my purchases. In my mind, rarity and exclusivity went hand in hand with quality. If something's harder to get, it's probably better. I remember the first time I bought a bottle of Colonel Taylor Small Batch. It was in the cardboard tube, and I was like, this is fancy. Like, this isn't like the normal stuff out on a shelf, you know, and I didn't know any better. I remember the first bottle of Weller I got, and it was SR, and I also remember taking a drink of it and being extremely let down because so many people online had talked big about the Weller name, and I tried it, and I was like, not impressed.
So that was my next question. If you had ever bought a bottle just because of the hype and regretted it later, that Weller SR, would that be your regret?
No regrets.
Oh, okay. Not even one? Not even a letter?
No regrets. No. I mean, I've had some bottle. Okay, I take that back. There's been some that I've had. You know, everybody's palate's different. What you like in a bourbon, how you like to drink it, is different. The way that I drink my bourbon would probably disgust the purists. Right?
Yes.
You know, I get it, you know, I've got a set of Glencairns and I like to do, you know, the half-ounce pour and, you know, get a snoot full of it and, you know, swirl and
Be fancy.
you know. I really like to drop 2 ice balls in a glass and fill it to the top. And that's the way that I like to drink it. I like it on ice.
Yeah.
And I just like it because it makes it cold. If I had a fridge big enough, I'd keep all the bourbon in a fridge, but I like it cold.
So at what point did bourbon turn into something you just liked and into a full-blown hobby? Because it was before you and I.
Yes. It's kind of like a snowball. It starts as something small and you keep going and you keep learning, and there's always new bottles to chase. And it's kind of like, you don't drink bourbon, but you enjoy the time we spend together trying to find bottles and chasing and everything else that goes along with it. And I enjoy that part of it too. A lot of it is the hunt, especially with the allocated stuff. I've had a lot of allocated stuff that, it didn't blow my socks off, but it's fun to chase, and it's fun to get one when you get it. And you do feel like you got a $100 scratcher at the gas station, whenever you get a good one, and you're like, heck yeah. Earlier this year, we got a bottle of Pappy 12 year at MSRP, and I had to sacrifice several hours sitting in the cold like people used to do on Black Friday at the Walmart. I got accused of being a homeless person sleeping on the sidewalk at one point. But
true story, yeah.
That was legit.
So how many bottles are in your collection right now?
Almost 160. I think we're at like 150. 155.
So what percentage is opened versus unopened, and why?
They're pretty much all open. The only ones that aren't opened are duplicates.
And when you say duplicates, because it's something that I address on the channel a lot, is like, we're not hoarding, but it's like your next bottle of something that you like.
The only thing we have more than 2 bottles of is Caribou Crossing, and that's not
And
really...
Blackened.
Okay. I go through Blackened fast. Blackened's not a real super popular bourbon, but it clicks with me. I really like it, and I've drank like 3 gallons of it in the last year, and it is a good daily pour for me. I really like it. I don't know if the music they play into the barrels, if any of that shit makes any difference, but on ice, it's a hard one to beat after a long day for me. It not expensive, not inexpensive. Not really hard to find. Well,
it just recently became hard to find. That's why you have multiple of the Blackened, because I went and got all of those.
Yeah, so the Blackened, they do batches like everybody else. And the first one that I tried, I really liked, batch 143. And I guess we're getting down to the bottom of the barrel on availability for that, but
yeah, I don't know why. Here in Southern Illinois, the batch 143 used to be everywhere. Now it's nowhere. Maybe it'll come back later this year. I don't know. Just before Christmas, I could find those 3 bottles. That was it.
I don't know, but somebody's
liking them.
Somebody is, other than me.
Yeah.
But that's one I could drink it every day and not feel guilty. If I drank 107. Or, some of the other, a lot of the bottles that we have are the super desirable top shelf, people would call them unicorn bottles.
So what's the oldest bottle you have?
Or from barrel 25 year.
What's the rarest bottle?
Probably the Weller's single barrel in all reality.
The orange label.
Yeah, just because to find it at a decent price has been one of the most difficult things. It's not hard to find. None of them are hard to find on secondary. You want to pay secondary price, we can load you out. But we usually really try hard to not pay 10 or 15% more than MSRP if we can help it. And we've only exceeded that on just very few bottles.
So this is a good question. What was the bottle you hunted forever? And like when we got together, you're like, we'll probably never have this. And then you finally found it and you're like, whoa.
Yeah, it's Rock Hill Farms. So I really got spoiled with that first bottle. And I rationed it for a while. It was really my, good day bottle, really bad day bottle, Not like most of my bottles where I look out the window and a leaf hits the ground and I'm like, that's a good reason. It was something special. I knew it was way before I even knew its limited nature, its secondary value.
No, I remember when we first started talking, you told me, like, I was making like a list because I didn't know anything about bourbon. And you were talking to some guy down at Mary Jane's, and you were like, oh yeah, CYPB. I didn't know what any of this meant. You're like, don't even write that down. We'll never get it. But we now have the Weller CYPB. So that was one that you were like, you didn't think at one point.
Well, yeah. The Pappies, I've got a 10-year and a 12-year. I really didn't think I would ever have those. Not that I wouldn't have the opportunity to buy them, because I've had the opportunity to buy, all the way up to Double Eagle Very Rare, Weller Millennium, at secondary value, and even the high bottles like that, even their MSRP is super high. You're several $1,000s on an MSRP.
Is there a bottle that you passed on that you regret?
No.
What's a bottle people always ask about when they see it on our shelf?
Oh, man. So here's a funny thing. We don't have a whole lot of friends that do the bourbon thing. We've got a couple, and...
Well, I know Ben, was pretty enthralled with the Stag Junior, or the short bottle Stag.
Yeah, it used to be Junior. Ben really likes barrel proofs. A lot of guys, after a while, getting into bourbon, they gravitate towards the barrel proofs. You can always add water. You can't take it out once it's in.
Yeah.
So they want the high proof stuff. You can tone it down. I like Stag. Stag's a little harsh for me. It's everything that it is supposed to be. It's everything that people want it to be. It's a little on the flavor forward profile for me.
Do you have a do not touch that bottle? Like if somebody came over, like we had Travis up here and he had drank a couple with you, we've had Ben over here and stuff, but is there a bottle that you'd be like, do not? No.
No. The Rock Hill Farm.
That's
probably gonna be it, really. I would sacrifice the Pappies before I would sacrifice the Rock Hill.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe it's a little, what do they call them? Like,
nostalgic?
Yeah, nostalgic.
Just a
sentimental?
Yeah.
At the time when I found that, I was in the police academy.
Yeah.
And I was just really kind of starting the bourbon collection. I'd been going for a while, but not really sourcing these more higher end bottles. I've been collecting a lot of, your mid-shelf, the Elijah Craigs, the, store pick Maker's Marks, stuff like that. I hadn't really even tried to find some of the real hard to get stuff that's good. In our area, Colonel Taylor small batch, Weller, SR, things like that, they're just not hard to get.
Yeah.
Eagle Rare, 10-year.
Everywhere.
Yeah, that stuff's just not hard to get. It's on shelves everywhere. So, other parts of the country, we hear people talk about oh, if I find a case of Eagle Rare, I buy the whole case.
Yeah.
It's just in our area, that type of stuff is not real hard to find.
Would you say that you're more likely to chase age, proof, mash bill, or brand? I have my own opinion on this, but...
I don't really... I know what you're going to say is mash bill.
Yep.
I don't really... I don't chase. I don't go out and look for a bottle. I don't know what you call it. We're more of opportunistic buyers.
Well, I feel like we have a list. Like the Old Forester birthday. Rock Hill Farm is always on that list forever for obvious reasons. I think you have the list that if we find it, we're on it.
Well,
we like to see everything.
So when we first started, for those of you listening, when we first started this bourbon collection, I had already previously had a collection, and it met a untimely demise. We'll get into that at a later date, right? But I had went a couple of years. I didn't collect. I didn't even really drink much You know, I may buy a bottle every once in a while, you know, and nip off of it every once in a while, but I didn't really there for a couple of years. I didn't drink much. Um, but then when we started chasing again, was trying to explain to Tina about, you know, hey, this is like hard. Some of these are hard to get, and she didn't understand it until she kind of started doing it. And then the way that her mind works versus mine, she built out a spreadsheet of Nash bills of bottles that I liked, because she didn't know enough about bourbon
to just pick up a bottle.
And be like, oh,
Yeah.
he's gonna like this. So, you know, she's smart and I'm dumb, and
You are not.
she created a flavor profile that she knew that I would like on Excel, and then she used that to find bottles for me. And I mean, you've only missed once.
That Noble Oak.
Yeah, that's
You didn't like Woodinville.
I didn't like it at first. It once I opened it, resealed it, you know, the flavor finished developing in the bottle, it became something that I actually really enjoy now. At first, I wasn't head over heels about it. For viewers unfamiliar, you were a veteran service officer, correct?
Yes.
So what is a veteran service officer? What do they do?
We just, you know, do a lot of phone calls and emails and get beat up all the time. But we're advocates. We're advocates for veterans and their families that are applying for VA disability compensation, military education benefits, burial benefits, benefits for widows, children, anything that's really in the realm of being any kind of benefit, state, federal, related to veterans. And so I was there for almost 4 years, 3.5 years, advocating. A huge advocate. I was actually pretty good at it, really successful.
You were a veteran yourself.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We
Yeah.
talked about that. So as the veteran service officer, was that the first veteran assistance job that you had worked outside of the military?
Nope. I was actually at a college where I ran their veterans office, helping veterans and again their family members apply for education benefits. So GI Bill, state scholarships. I was an academic advisor and basically told them how to use their GI Bill to get the degree that they wanted without having to pay out of pocket, how to be full-time to get the most out of their benefit. Just kind of help them on that path, whether they were just wanting to get a certificate, an associate's, bachelor's, master's, PhD, whatever. So I kind of helped them on that path and made sure that they were using their benefits the best they could so they wouldn't have to pay out of pocket.
You know, you're a veteran, I'm a veteran. You know, I think we both can agree, like the military, they're
They
They're
don't
not- they're-
prepare you
well, they're not the best at informing you.
about your benefits.
Right.
Like, you know you have the benefit,
But you don't know what it is. You don't know.
you don't know how to apply for it. Or like how to use it
Yeah, like-
efficiently, I guess is what I should say.
Yeah, you know, you just don't know. And
Yeah.
you know, so it's great to have somebody like you that, you know, can take someone by the hand and kind of lead them along the path.
Yes, and that was my reputation, right? For like holding the hand, and like everybody was kind of pissy with me because I took too long, and they just thought I should bring guys in and push you back out and go
Well,
on
I
with
mean,
the day.
that's the Army way, right?
Right.
And I mean, I couldn't imagine the challenges of either one of those positions, since most veterans are, you know, they're so polite and they're so
Very.
understanding and
Patient. Yeah. Yeah. Mhm. Again, we're veterans, so we're definitely going to talk shit about it. You know. And you know, that was the hardest part of the job too, is that you're a veteran trying to help other veterans and people getting so frustrated with you because one, they know they have the benefit to like go to college, right? But they don't understand the process that has to go through the college, to the VA, you know, making sure that they're certified, their payment goes into their account, if they have to check in with the VA monthly to get it there. Like, they're just mad about the whole situation. And, you know, understandably so, because nobody's like, oh, hey, you know. And when we're in the military, you know, like if you have an admin problem, you go to the admin office and they just, you know, take care of it. Finance, same thing. Supply, you know, like we don't have to like actually do things. We just go to the office and stand in line like, hey, fix it.
Anybody that's ever had a military debt, I mean, it doesn't take long to get
Yeah.
their money back.
Right.
Right. So, dealing with veterans, like, we just kind of covered, they're going to have unique hardships, barriers to overcome, things like that. Like, what was the hardest part of the VSO job, or at the college, or both? Or, is there just kind of like a general blanket that, like, veterans are maybe, lack of a better word, hard to deal with, or convoluted processes?
At the college, the hardest part was usually at the college, you were dealing with either non-traditional students, meaning veterans that had done their time and like didn't go to college. They weren't guard members, so they were coming in at like 35, 36, 40, like whatever, trying to go and get a degree.
They grown.
And right, and they're transitioning out of the military and going into civilian life. So that was hard, because it's different. Especially hard if people are transitioning into civilian life after, a war zone situation, or maybe just not even a great situation in the military that exists, and just trying to make that transition. There's also there's also a part too, civilian, like here in Southern Illinois, everybody's so patriotic and it's very welcoming. So when I say this with a lot of gratitude and respect, but also understanding that some civilians think they know, right? And they'll be like, for example, I had a situation with a student. He had just came back from, I believe it was Afghanistan. He was definitely dealing with some PTSD. It was during, at the college they would always fire off this cannon like all day long before, I think it was like Hunting and Fishing Days or something like that.
Yeah.
And the veteran didn't know it was going to happen, even though they had sent out text blasts, email blasts. There were signs like all over campus. Like my office was in charge of making sure it was like everywhere, but somehow it missed this guy, right? He ends up in my office. He's standing at parade rest outside my office waiting for me to tell him to come in. Like he's like in full mode. And it's heartbreaking to see it, right? Because all I could do was get him off campus, because the cannon's going to keep going off every hour, and it's just taking him back to a place he obviously does not want to be in.
Right.
But I remember going and talking to other staff members and trying to get them to understand like why this was so troubling for that veteran, and being cut off and being told, oh, I know my nephew served, or oh, I know my cousin or my friend's friend, but they don't know. So that was frustrating. That was hard on that side, is trying to bridge that gap between veterans and civilians wanting to be supportive, but also thinking that they know, and then also veterans thinking they know how their benefits work and how that's going to translate being on campus, and it just not doing well. And so just trying to bridge that gap. So military to civilian life and civilians to veterans, and then also veterans, actually using their benefits in like real life situation versus whatever they went through in TAPS or, heard about from their retention NCO.
I think a lot of people that they fail to realize, if you were a normal person, you were to join the military, would you agree it would be a significant adjustment?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And a lot of times for a lot of these guys and women, they exfil out of the military, and it can be just as much of a shock for them coming back to the normal blue collar or the office. And
well, right, because nobody's telling you, hey, you got to get up, you got to do PT, hey, you're wearing this, you're doing this, you got to be here at this time. Now they just kind of get to wake up when they want, wear what they want, go where they want.
Yeah.
There's no structure in real life, unless you put it there.
Would you agree in the military? Well, I don't know if you'd agree with this or not. I can say that I would, right? In my experience in the military, respect was a big thing. I don't know if that was the same for you. I don't know if it's combat MOS thing, right? But
Well, I think respect is a big thing throughout the military on any side, whether it's co-ed or all male unit. I just think that the way things are handled are differently, because it's not male to male, right, always in every situation. So, whether anybody, I don't want to get on this whole male versus female thing, but a male disciplining a female, like there's different protocols in that situation.
Right.
You have to have other people present, you got to make sure that like whatever is being doled out would be doled out no matter the gender. It has to meet the specifications of the situation.
Right.
You know what I mean?
I feel like even amongst peers in the military, I received a certain level of respect.
Mm-hmm.
But in the personal workforce, you don't always get that, right?
No.
You know what I mean?
No.
And especially at college, like,
No.
it's just a bunch of younger people for the most part, kids.
Yeah.
And
being a female, most of them don't automatically assume that I'm a veteran. And then on the staff side, I remember like people like talking about PTSD, like I don't know, it was the color of my shirt, being like, oh yeah, like you have like PTSD, right? And I was just like, whoa, like
what?
One, you can't like talk to me about that in a workplace environment. You can't ask me those questions. But two, that's like a much deeper conversation, and we're not having that here.
Like Red Bulls.
Yeah. So, oh, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
But the hardest part of the VSO job, we kind of got off on a tangent there, and I'm trying not to, but was the veterans that I lost. You get, as a VSO, you get to know the veteran and the families on such a deep and personal level. As I shared with you when I was working there, like 90% of my guys were Vietnam veterans, and a lot of these guys didn't talk about the things they went through. And so sometimes they were sitting in my office telling me things they had never told anybody. And sometimes family members were present and they were hearing these things for the first time, whether it was dad or grandpa, and helping them with their claims and helping them write their letters and their statements. It's hard not to care and to get close. And so I think the first devastating part for me was the first veteran that I lost. He died. Oh my God. So we got his claim. We got him to 100%. He's really cool, really sweet old Marine. His name was Virgil. And he ended up passing. And I think that was something that stuck with me because I went to his funeral. I was still helping his wife apply for her benefits. Like that was the hard part of the VSO job.
Right. We've had conflicts since this country started, and
they're so cool though. Like, their stories and like what they went through. This guy, he had like multiple bronze stars, and I was like, oh man, that's like what did you do? That's so cool.
Legit.
And he's just like, just saving people.
Well, and it's got to be wild,
God.
to tag off of what we, mentioned earlier. Like a lot of those guys, they don't talk about that stuff.
They don't.
Mm-hmm. But whenever they come to you, they kind of have to.
They have to, yeah.
Dust that book off and get back into that. And
yeah.
Does that get messy?
Of course, because I'm sure it brings them back to a time like we talked about in the earlier podcast notes. Like with my dad, they weren't exactly welcomed back home with open arms. So a lot of these guys, they came back. They weren't necessarily ashamed of their service, but they knew that there was a shame around it. Especially Vietnam, baby killers was definitely a term used and thrown out there. They were spit on. They were.
Didn't have very good stigma.
Right. You know what I mean? And so now they have to come and talk to a woman they've never met. And I'm like, so now we're really going to talk about what you did. And I need you to be honest with it. And we're going to get into it. And I'm going to help you write these things. So you don't have to do the stressful part. But the stressful part is them having to relive things that they've maybe never talked about before.
And it's strange to think that, on some level, a lot of these veterans, you probably know them or relate to them on a level that probably maybe nobody else has in their family, siblings, spouses.
Yeah, and a lot of I had a handful of like doozies, but a lot of the Vietnam era guys, they would come in and talk to me. I'd be like, hey, like mental health, it's different now. You really need to go and talk. You can actually take a pill once a day and knock the edge off. You don't have to white knuckle it. Yeah. You don't have to be Superman anymore. You don't have to like shove that down, and raise the kids and take care of the wife and be a big man. Like you can like take care of yourself now. And I can't tell you my first year in that position how many older men cried in my office. And like I got this reputation that I made these veterans cry, but it wasn't like a bad thing. And I hate using the term safe space, but I think they were able to kind of let those defenses down.
Well, when you lift the weight off somebody that they've carried for 40 years,
Yeah.
50 years, 60 years.
And tell them that it's okay.
Yeah.
And that they can go, and then telling and thanking them. And like, that's something that I did with every Vietnam era and older, is that they would always thank me for my service first. Have you ever gotten that? Like, so, you know, these Vietnam guys that like were doing, oh gosh, ruck marches and going into nowhere, you know, no cameras, no phones, like nothing like what we have today.
That's definitely...
They're in a totally different world, you know, and like I have so much adoration and respect for them, and they're thanking me for my service first, but it's because they didn't get it when they came home.
Paying it forward.
Yeah, and me stopping them and being like, no. Like, we are so grateful for you, because without your era, our era wouldn't even be here. Like, we wouldn't even be able to survive.
Yeah.
Because they made sure we got the welcome.
Well, you know.
You know, we got the welcome home because of those prior veterans, and I don't think anybody should ever get that warped, because our welcome home is because of them, because they knew what it was like to come home and not have it.
Yeah, absolutely.
100%. So
but
that's the hard part.
You know, and I'm sure that this is probably something that we could talk about for hours.
Oh, yeah.
Because
has nothing to do with bourbon, though.
we're getting there. So, you know, I touched on it a minute ago about, you know, you're a Excel spreadsheet savant. What did that work teach you about documentation and accountability?
You know, for them in that type of work, and then I'm just going to try to get back on track with our bourbon, because that's what we're trying to do here. But I always took notes in my initial interviews with veterans, especially the older population, but even with our era, because sometimes we remember things for a second and then we like push it away, right?
Yeah.
And then when I would go and like review all of their records and making sure that I'm taking notes about dates, times, even if they were just like, oh, this one time this happened, I'll make a note, because it might be significant later in their claim, and then I can help jog their memory. And so the documentation and the accountability part on that side is wild, because I always wanted the best for my veterans. 100% was always the goal when it came to the compensation disability side. I was never like, oh, we're just going to see what's happening. I always told them 100% is the goal. They'd come to me and be like, if I can get to 70, I'll be happy. I'm like, 100% is the goal. I'm not saying we're going to get there. I'm saying that's the goal, you know, where we're going. And so I think a lot of that follows me everywhere I go. I don't think I'm a very much like half-ass person. No. Like, if we're going to bourbon hunt, we're going to bourbon hunt. Like, if we're looking for like high-end bourbon or allocators, or like, we're going for all of the unicorns, right? So we got the CYPB, we got some of the Pappy, the Orange Barrel, and all of that too, you know.
Now on the, you know, documentation accountability, so at some point, you know, we'll talk about the spreadsheet. You know, I kind of touched on it with, you know, you track the mash bills, helped you select bottles from you, right? Mm-hmm. What about tagging the bottles?
Yeah, you know, that was something, that was making it personal, you know, for us. Because I think when we first started doing it, we were dating, and I think everybody's kind of thought that we were just like partying our butts off, because we were always posting about bourbon on social media. They're like, oh my God, this woman's a lush. She's gotten with him, and now all he does is just drink all the time, you know. And so I think that was important to me too. So I tagged the bottles, the date we bought them,
right?
Okay, where we bought them, you know, store, state, like whatever.
Yeah. What
the bottle is, how much we paid for it. Mm-hmm. But like the cool part, right, was like a memory from that day. Like, you know, we went to St. Louis to see Chelsea Handler, you know, that day, and we happened to stop into one of the stores and found some bourbon, you know, that was part of the memory. So then when you finish those bottles, we hang up the tags, we still have it's kind of like a cute little scrapbook.
Well, and
you know, but it also allows us to be like, oh yeah, you know, I paid $60 for that.
Yeah, because after a while, I mean, they all just kind of blend in.
Yeah.
You don't remember what you paid for what or when you got it or whatever. So
yeah,
you know, did being a VSO kill your tolerance for like the hype and misinformation, you know, directly relating to bourbon?
Oh, right? Yeah,
because a lot of bottles are overhyped.
Yeah,
and there is just as much misinformation as there is information.
Yeah. So the correlation, right, is that when you're filing for your VA disability as a veteran, oh, my friend said to file for ED, and I get $500 extra a month. Well, part of that's true. It's not $500. It is something you can file for. It's completely claimable. And you can't just like go, hey, write on a piece of paper, I have ED, now give me money. Like, you have to go and like get diagnosed. You have to figure out how it's service connected. Like, you have to figure that out. And then on the bourbon world, right, is that they're like, oh, the best bourbon is, everybody always says Pappy, right? I get that. I've learned that. But it's also about like what you personally like, so you might enjoy a Pappy 10, 12, 23, whatever, but what if your favorite is Long Branch? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or Rock Hill Farms, so.
I always get a kick out of the Henry McKenna 10-year.
Yeah.
Several years ago, it won some award.
Yeah.
Everybody went crazy over it, and, the price was, it wasn't uncommon to pay, $100 a bottle. And now that I have done this for a couple of years, there's, 50, 60, 100, 200 bourbon competitions in the world.
Yeah.
And this one bottle, hits good one time, and they publicize this is the best bottle, this one best bourbon in the world.
It was probably like the only one that entered the competition.
Yeah, there's like 50 other ones. You see that on so many bottles. And
yeah.
It's not to say that it's hyped, but it gets lost in the wash. Like it's almost you can't use that as a bargaining chip anymore.
No. Mm-mm.
So, we know that you've been veteran service officer. We know that you worked at a college. Assuming you attend college.
Yes. So I got an AAS, an Associate in Applied Science and Marketing at a junior college because I didn't know what the hell I was doing.
So you're a scientist?
No.
Oh.
It's just like a 2-year, like, whatever.
Okay, so it's just, general associates.
Yeah, mm-hmm. But it has no gen eds in it, you know what I mean? So, God, man, I'm going to say this. I didn't have the greatest academic advisor, so they put me in this AAS in the junior college and then sent me over to SI University. I thought I was going to be going in as like a junior into my bachelor's. I get there, and they're like, nah. I was basically a freshman walking into the university because my AAS had no, like, very minimal gen eds, so you got to have like both of your Englishes, your speech, and I was like, man, what the crap?
So you think that played a hand in you, taking that job in the college at the office?
So what's funny is that I worked in that office as a student worker while I was going to that junior college. And there were things I wanted to change then, and the person that was in charge, I don't know if she was in charge of that office, but she was the one that handled the VA side of things. There was so much more she could have done to make it better.
Right. And
she didn't want to. So like in my brain, I was like, oh man, if I ever had that job, I would do X, Y, and Z. And so when I did finally finish my bachelor's, I have a BS in business with marketing as the minor. That job just happened to be open, and I applied for it, got it, and then I made like all those changes that I thought about as first going into college, and then that I did my master's in workforce education and development, which is basically helping adults learn in the workforce. And teach and like kind of HR world there. And then I started my PhD as well in organizational leadership and development. I haven't finished that yet, as you know. So
work in progress.
Yeah. So I'm really analytical in that aspect. I think that shows with the tracking and the tagging and even how I do the YouTube channel. And because you'd be like, oh, this would be a really cool episode. I'm like, yeah, we'll put that on the back burner because vidIQ says this is actually better for the algorithm, Well,
and I mean, it hasn't missed. I mean, and so much of bourbon is up to the drinker.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I mean, everything about it, even what's interesting. So you say analytics, are you analytical, intuitive, mixture of both? I feel like I know the answer to this.
I feel like I'm more analytical than anything. And then because of my analytical side, it's kind of like I do my research, like in-depth rabbit hole. You've lost me for like a month, and then I come out and I'm like, I'm okay now. And then it's kind of like intuitive after that because I understand what I'm looking for.
Well, I was gonna say, I feel like you almost build your own intuition.
Yeah, I guess maybe.
So you know, how does that affect how you learn bourbon? Because you're not a drinker, and it's amazing because you have built my palate.
Yes, I know. See,
So how is this being, third person,
that's the thing. I think bourbon is interesting. I think it's interesting as a whole. I think it's interesting how it started in America. I think it's interesting how it can only come from America. I think the mash bills are interesting. I think their whole process is interesting. I think all of the bourbon hunting, allocated, cutthroat style, black market, I think that's also interesting. And, I have a high interest in like crime and true crime, serial killers, because I'm that person. So like to me, every bottle is a story. And then that's like where I clicked with other bourbon people. And, when I first started on this, I didn't know anything about bourbon. That all came from you. You like held me hand and, so then I was just kind of like looking for bottles you would talk about. But then I was like, okay, he likes all these bottles. I think it was like the first like 50 bottles or so that we got into. And that's when I did the spreadsheet, figured out what the mash bill was, and then I compared all the mash bills and figured out that you liked higher corn percentage and you liked certain flavors. I still have that spreadsheet, and that way I could go in, I could look at a bottle if I wanted to get something for you for like a special moment, like when we got married or for your promotion or for like a birthday, Father's Day. I could go in and like look at those bottles, read the notes, understand the mash bill, and know that there was a very high probability that you would like it.
The student becomes the teacher.
But
So do you ever? Sorry,
No, you're fine.
My brain works slow. I'm not sharp like Tina. So, did you ever feel pressure to sound like you knew bourbon early on? Like, it's gotta be kind of different to have a bourbon page, but not really somebody that drinks bourbon. Like, I was already riding this horse and you hopped on the back of it, and now you're running it, and now I'm just kind of like trailing behind.
Whatever, no. So, well, when we started dating, you were like, I had this bourbon collection, untimely demise, never doing it again. And then I showed up with like 6 or 7 bottles. I'm like, let's do it again. So we did it. We got back on the horse, and like we'd go into liquor stores together and you would show me like what a mash bill was, or like what bottles are good, or like, lower shelf, higher shelf, allocated, sleepers, like whatever. You taught me the main like foundational stuff. But I remember like going to these liquor stores and just like listening to you talk to the managers and like people that work there or other bourbon people, and just being like, oh my god, like this is a whole thing, and people were interested to hear what you had to say. You know what I mean? And like to me, I was like, this is like so bizarre, it's so weird. And I always felt like you were the cool kid talking to the manager about all this stuff, and I was just like nodding my head in the background, like I was like this like ditzy friend that was there for like no reason. Like I was the comedic relief of the show, right? And then
you got the stage feel.
And then like when we started talking about the YouTube channel, we talked about it for like a couple of months, because I was like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if we did this X, Y, and Z? And you were like, oh yeah. And then it just kind of like sat there, and then one day I was like, I'm just gonna do an episode and throw it out there and see what happens.
Yeah.
And then you were just like, yeah, okay. And then we just kept going from there. And then, you had ideas for different episodes I should do. I started reaching out to like other bourbon people and being like, what about this? What about this? Teach me about YouTube, because I had been out of like undergraduate school as far as like business marketing and using tools like that for, oh my gosh, 10 years. 10 years. And so I had to like relearn a lot of that, using CapCut, recording, getting the right kind of mic, understanding like what's going on, that sort of thing too. So I didn't feel pressure necessarily, because nobody wanted to talk to me when we first started this. They wanted to talk to you because you were the bourbon guy, and like they were learning from you too, just like I was, So I never felt pressured. I think I just was more curious, and I had a lot more questions. You were like very much into like the tasting, trying, and understanding, and I wanted to know more. I wanted to know the facts. I wanted to know the story, and things, and then I would come back and tell you like these like weird things that I found out, you know, and you'd be like, oh my god, I never knew that.
Yeah, like historically, bourbon. This isn't the first time that bourbon has like the market is re-equalized. Back in the day, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, bourbon was the drink.
Yeah.
And then a shift came, and clear spirits, vodka, tequila, gin, they really took center stage. The younger crowd wanted to drink something different. They didn't want to drink something that their dad drank, their granddad drank.
Yeah.
They wanted something new, the Cosmopolitans and things like that. And then over time, bourbon kind of shifted back over, but you don't ever see bourbon as a women's drink.
Mm-mm.
Women and bourbon aren't really thought of in the same sentence.
Well, not like as like a neat, you know what I mean? I would say that women, I'm not saying all women, oh my gosh, I'm not sexist, neither is he. I'm just trying to figure out how to phrase this. I think we prefer more of a cocktail.
Right.
Because it's like I tell you, every time I smell just like straight bourbon, like kerosene.
Yeah.
But if you sit across the room and I can smell like the different notes that you can taste, I can't taste it like that. But if I can put it in a cocktail, where it has different mixers or even like garnishes and stuff like that, I can taste it better that way.
Yeah.
I can't do like I can't do like the ice cube thing like on the rocks. It doesn't matter to me. It's like all kerosene until I mix something else with it.
And it's been like an evolution for me when I, first started drinking. I'd mix it with Coke, Dr. Pepper,
Coca-Cola,
not cocaine, not cocaine. Yeah, I do that. I like old fashions and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then over time, maybe it's out of just laziness.
Maybe. But your palate got used to it too, though.
Yeah, it's adjusted. I mean, it's acclimated to it. Now I think about putting Coke in it or something, and I'm like,
Coca-Cola.
Coke. Yeah. Not the kind with that kind of straw. But yeah, so do you think the bourbon culture, being a man's drink, being your dad's, your grandpa's drink, does that make it harder for women to like try to branch out or try to, get into that market that, they don't really have an angle of it that's really like aimed at women?
I disagree. I don't think the bourbon market only targets men, right? I think they market bourbon as bourbon. And this is like some of the stuff too. Like Castle and Key, they have a female distiller, mixer, whatever.
Master distiller.
There you go, master distiller. See, you're still teaching me things.
Mixer. I like it.
Mixer. And then like Frey Ranch, that's a couple running that too.
Yeah.
So I definitely think there are women that are in it. I just don't think that women are advertised as much as being in it because the percentage of women that are interested in it versus men is obviously lower. And that's just pure market research. That's not saying I'm guessing this. This is just across the board. You look at it, there are more men that are interested in bourbon as a whole than women are. But, it's the same for me too. Like I can do the bourbon creams, I can do bourbon cocktails, but I also like margaritas, pina coladas, sangrias, you know what I mean? So I feel like, and I also think that sometimes men are shamed for liking like the fruity drinks, the cutesy drinks.
I like it truly.
Yeah, So, you know what I mean?
It's, it's just, they're going to market it however they make money.
Yeah. So I don't think bourbon culture makes it harder because even like following you around, like the bourbon groups here in our area, I've been totally welcomed.
You've built relationships and scored us bottles.
For real.
I don't think they would have. I'm not as pretty as you.
I think you're very pretty. In fact, a lot of people tell me how pretty you are, but they do.
Mm.
Yeah. But, I think it's because we're both very personable.
Yeah.
But I don't think any manager that I've talked to about bourbon has been like, oh, I'm not talking to you because you're a female.
Well,
I don't think that's
actually,
happening.
I think it would be quite the opposite. They see you and they're like, holy shit, this is a breath of fresh air.
Yeah.
This is different. Here is an attractive woman, and, she's not a 20-year-old child, and she's asking questions about bourbon that your normal bourbon off the shelf, the guy that's grabbing the makers, for a weekend, he's not asking these questions. He's not even looking for these bottles.
Mm-hmm.
But you're different. You know, a lot. Well, I'd say 99% of the time that we have went and picked up bottles, you might have been the only woman there.
Probably, yeah.
You know.
Yeah,
So,
but they see this as a package deal. You know, people that know us around here,
Oh,
they
yeah.
know us like as a couple. You know what I mean? I might be the one that's in there more just because you know you have a more stressful like job schedule, and I'm usually the one that can run over and grab something. But like they know us together.
Oh yeah.
But I think it's more surprising for men to see me come in and ask about bourbon. And then I think they're kind of testing me to see what I actually know about bourbon. But I'm also testing them to see what they know because I don't know how many times I've walked in and people don't even know what allocateds are. So, you know, it goes back and forth.
Well, that's how you.
I think where I score though is like talking to like the female staff.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I think that is more.
You're probably not.
They don't feel dumb like talking to a man that knows a lot about bourbon.
They probably don't have that. You probably maybe you don't bring the intimidation maybe factor that.
Well, we've heard the scary stories too. People chasing the trucks and like stalking stores and stuff, and they're aggressive when they come in. I'm not going in aggressive.
Yeah, or be all shitty mad if they get, shut down.
Yeah, I don't think it makes it harder. I think it gives me an in.
I think there's definitely some added benefit.
Yeah, I think bourbon accepts everybody.
It does. I think you're right.